The lights dimmed in the studio as the audience erupted into applause. Bill Maher, the sharp-tongued host of one of late-night television's most talked-about shows, walked onto the stage with his signature confident stride. His suit was crisp, his smile mischievous, and his energy palpable. The crowd loved him, not just because he was funny, but because he wasn't afraid to say what others might only think. Tonight's guest was none other than Keanu Reeves, the actor whose name had become synonymous with coolness over decades in Hollywood. Keanu took his seat across from Maher, looking every bit the unassuming star that fans adored. He wore a simple black jacket over a plain t-shirt, paired with jeans that seemed like they'd been pulled straight out of his closet without much thought. His hair was slightly tousled, and there was no trace of pretense in his demeanor. As he settled in, the contrast between him and Maher couldn't have been more striking. Where Maher thrived on bold opinions and provocative statements, Keanu exuded calmness, almost as if he were floating above the chaos of the world. "Welcome back," Maher said cheerfully, turning toward Keanu with a grin. "We've got a legend here tonight, Mr. Keanu Reeves." The audience cheered again, some shouting their favorite movie titles: The Matrix, John Wick, Speed. It was clear everyone was excited to see him. Keanu gave a small wave and smiled politely, his usual reserved self shining through. Maher launched into the interview by asking about Keanu's latest projects. They discussed his work ethic, his dedication to stunt choreography, and how he manages to stay so grounded despite being one of the biggest names in Hollywood. Keanu answered each question thoughtfully, speaking in measured tones and occasionally pausing to reflect before responding. His humility was refreshing, especially in an industry where egos often ran wild. As the conversation flowed smoothly, Maher began steering it toward deeper topics. This was where he excelled, pushing boundaries and challenging guests to reveal something unexpected. At first, the questions were lighthearted. Do you ever get tired of playing all these action heroes? Or, what's your secret to staying fit at your age? But then, almost imperceptibly, Maher shifted gears. "So, Keanu," Maher said, leaning back in his chair with a playful smirk, "you've lived such an interesting life. You've traveled the world, worked with incredible people, seen things most of us can only dream of. Do you ever find yourself wondering, what's it all for? Like, is there something bigger out there?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "Yeah, I think about that sometimes," he replied. "Life can feel overwhelming if you don't have something to anchor yourself to. For me, it's important to focus on what matters: family, friends, kindness, gratitude." Maher nodded, pretending to mull this over. Then, with a gleam in his eye, he went in for the punch. "Okay, but let's get real for a second. You strike me as someone who's spiritual, but do you actually believe in all that religious stuff? Like, come on, Keanu. Do you really believe in Jesus?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The audience grew quiet, unsure of how to react. Some chuckled nervously, while others leaned forward, intrigued by where this line of questioning might lead. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked directly at Maher, his expression calm but attentive. There was no hint of defensiveness, no sign of irritation. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in engaging with the topic. "You know," Keanu began slowly, his voice steady and deliberate, "faith means different things to different people. For me, it's not about trying to explain everything logically. It's about finding hope and meaning in a chaotic world." Maher raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting a joke or a vague answer he could pounce on. When none came, he pressed further. "But seriously, though, a guy like you, a guy who rides motorcycles, does insane stunts, lives life on the edge, are you telling me you still believe in miracles? Walking on water? Rising from the dead? Doesn't that sound a little far-fetched?" The tension in the room thickened. The audience held its collective breath, waiting to see how Keanu would respond. Would he laugh it off? Change the subject? Or would he stand his ground? What happened next would leave everyone speechless and change the tone of the entire evening. The studio lights gleamed off the polished table as Bill Maher leaned forward, his trademark smirk firmly in place. He had found his opening, and he was ready to take full advantage of it. Keanu's calm demeanor only seemed to fuel Maher's determination to push harder. "Come on, Keanu," Maher said, his tone dripping with playful sarcasm. "You're not exactly the choir boy type, are you? You're out there racing motorcycles, beating up bad guys on screen, living this larger-than-life existence. So why hold on to something as old school as believing in Jesus? Doesn't that feel, I don't know, a little outdated?" Keanu sat still, his posture relaxed but attentive. His hands rested lightly on the armrests of his chair, and his expression remained neutral. If Maher's words rattled him, it didn't show. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the question without jumping to respond immediately. This brief pause only heightened the anticipation in the room. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they were about to witness a lighthearted exchange or something more serious. Maher, sensing the growing tension, decided to turn up the heat. "I mean, let's be honest here," he continued, gesturing animatedly for emphasis. "Religion has been responsible for a lot of nonsense over the years. Wars, oppression, all that stuff. And then you've got these stories that sound like fairy tales. Walking on water, turning water into wine, coming back from the dead. Don't get me wrong, they make for great storytelling. But do you really think any of that actually happened?" The audience chuckled nervously, some clapping politely at Maher's boldness while others exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that Maher was trying to provoke a reaction, perhaps hoping Keanu would either laugh along or awkwardly dodge the question. But Keanu wasn't biting. Instead, he took a deep breath, his gaze steady and unwavering as he prepared to respond. "You know," Keanu began, his voice soft but carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention, "it's easy to dismiss things we don't fully understand, or things that don't fit neatly into our modern worldview. But faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trust. Trust in something bigger than ourselves." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "For me, Jesus represents love, compassion, forgiveness. Those aren't outdated ideas. They're timeless. They're principles that can guide us, no matter where we are in life." Maher raised an eyebrow, clearly unprepared for such a measured response. He tried to interject with another jab, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "But come on, Keanu," he said, his tone teasing yet persistent. "Isn't it just easier to admit that maybe, just maybe, these stories are a little too good to be true? I mean, doesn't science explain everything better than religion does?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Science explains a lot of things," he agreed, nodding thoughtfully. "And I respect that. Science helps us understand the world around us, how things work, why things happen. But science doesn't answer every question. It doesn't tell us how to live, how to treat each other, or what gives our lives meaning. That's where faith comes in, for me at least." The room grew quieter with each word Keanu spoke. His delivery was neither defensive nor preachy. Instead, it carried a sincerity that resonated deeply. Even Maher seemed momentarily caught off guard, his usual quick wit faltering under the weight of Keanu's calm conviction. Sensing an opportunity to shift the mood, Maher attempted to lighten the moment with humor. "Well, I guess if anyone can pull off being both a motorcycle-riding action star and a believer, it's you," he quipped, forcing a laugh. But Keanu wasn't done. With a slight smile, he added, "Look, I'm not saying everyone needs to believe the same thing I do. That's not the point. What matters is finding something that gives your life purpose, whether it's faith, family, art, nature, whatever. For me, my beliefs keep me grounded. They remind me to focus on kindness, humility, and gratitude. And honestly, I'd rather live my life striving to follow those values than tearing people down for what they choose to believe." At this, the audience erupted into spontaneous applause. Some clapped enthusiastically, while others sat quietly, visibly moved by Keanu's words. Maher, meanwhile, looked momentarily stunned. His attempt to paint Keanu's faith as naive or outdated had backfired spectacularly. Instead of stumbling over his response, Keanu had delivered a thoughtful, respectful rebuttal that left little room for mockery. Sensing the shift in energy, Maher quickly tried to regain control of the conversation. All right, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Let's talk about something else before we all start holding hands and singing hymns. The audience laughed, though it was clear the moment had already passed. Keanu simply smiled, unfazed by Maher's efforts to brush off the seriousness of their exchange. As the interview moved on to lighter topics, the lingering impact of Keanu's response was undeniable. The actor's ability to remain composed and authentic under pressure had transformed what could have been a trivial debate into something far more profound. For the rest of the show, Maher avoided revisiting the subject, perhaps realizing that he had underestimated his guest. Meanwhile, Keanu's quiet confidence continued to shine through, leaving viewers, and even Maher himself, with plenty to think about long after the cameras stopped rolling. The room was still buzzing with the weight of Keanu's words when Bill Maher made one last attempt to regain his footing. Leaning forward in his chair, he adopted a more casual tone, trying to mask his earlier discomfort. Okay, he said with a forced chuckle, waving his hand as if to brush aside the gravity of the moment. Let's not get too philosophical here. I mean, we're on a comedy show, right? We're supposed to be having fun. Keanu nodded politely, his expression calm and composed. He didn't seem offended or irritated by Maher's pivot. Instead, he appeared ready to engage further no matter where the conversation went. This unshakable demeanor only seemed to frustrate Maher more. It was clear that the comedian thrived on provoking reactions, whether laughter, defensiveness, or outright disagreement, but Keanu's measured responses were throwing him off balance. Well, let me ask you this, Maher pressed on, determined to keep the spotlight on Keanu's beliefs. If Jesus is such a big deal to you, why don't you talk about it more? You're not exactly out there preaching on street corners or handing out Bibles, are you? Doesn't that make your faith kind of private? Keanu leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His body language suggested he was fully present in the conversation, listening intently before responding. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warmth that contrasted sharply with Maher's sharp-edged humor. Faith is personal, he said simply. It's not about making noise or drawing attention to yourself. For me, it's about living my life in a way that reflects what I believe. Actions speak louder than words, right? Maher tilted his head, clearly intrigued but unwilling to let go of his line of questioning. So you're saying you don't feel the need to convince others to believe what you believe? No proselytizing, no debates, nothing? Keanu shook his head gently. Not at all. Everyone's journey is different. I respect that. My job isn't to tell people what to believe. It's to live my own life with integrity and kindness. If someone asks me about my faith, sure, I'll share. But I'm not interested in forcing my views on anyone else. That's not what faith is about for me. This response seemed to catch Maher off guard. He opened his mouth to retort, then closed, it again momentarily unsure of how to proceed. The audience, sensing the shift in dynamics, remained unusually quiet. There was something compelling about watching two vastly different personalities collide, not with hostility, but with genuine curiosity and respect. Finally, Maher broke the silence with another jab, though it lacked the bite of his earlier remarks. All right, so you're the chill, non-pushy believer, got it. But come on, Keanu, don't you ever doubt? I mean, doesn't everyone have moments where they question whether any of this stuff is real? Keanu smiled faintly as if he'd been expecting the question. Of course, he admitted without hesitation. Doubt is part of the process. It's human to wonder, to search for answers, but doubt doesn't mean disbelief. Sometimes it's just a reminder to dig deeper, to stay open to learning and growing. Faith isn't about having everything figured out. It's about trusting even when you don't. The simplicity of Keanu's explanation struck a chord. Even Maher, who prided himself on his intellectual skepticism, found it hard to dismiss. For a brief moment, the comedian seemed almost reflective, as though he were considering the possibility that faith might not be as black and white as he'd always assumed. Sensing an opportunity to steer the conversation back toward lighter territory, Maher attempted one final quip. Well, I guess if I ever decide to trade in my atheist card for a believer's badge, I'll know who to call, he joked, pointing at Keanu with mock seriousness. To his credit, Keanu laughed along good-naturedly. Hey, I'll be here, he replied with a shrug and a grin. But until then, maybe we can agree to disagree, and still respect each other while we do it. The audience erupted into applause once again, this time with a sense of relief mixed with admiration. What had started as a potentially contentious exchange had evolved into something far more meaningful, a rare glimpse into the intersection of belief, doubt, and mutual respect. Maher, perhaps realizing he'd underestimated his guest, shifted gears entirely, moving on to safer topics like upcoming movie projects and favorite travel destinations. As the interview continued, Keanu's presence remained steady and engaging. He answered questions about his career with the same humility and thoughtfulness he'd shown during the discussion about faith. Yet, it was clear that the earlier exchange had left a lasting impression, not just on Maher, but on everyone watching. Backstage. After the taping, whispers circulated among the crew and producers. Many expressed surprise at how gracefully Keanu had handled Maher's provocations. Some praised him for refusing to rise to the bait, while others marveled at his ability to turn a potentially awkward moment into something inspiring. One producer remarked, "You don't see that kind of poise every day. Most guests would have either shut down or gone on the attack. But Keanu? He turned it into a masterclass in diplomacy." Meanwhile, social media began lighting up with clips of the interview. Viewers flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram with comments praising Keanu's response. Memes and GIFs capturing his calm demeanor quickly went viral, accompanied by captions like, "When you handle controversy better than anyone expects," and "Proof that kindness wins." Religious leaders chimed in, commending Keanu for standing firm in his beliefs without resorting to hostility. Even critics of organized religion acknowledged the actor's grace under pressure, noting that his approach transcended divisive arguments. For Maher, the encounter served as a humbling reminder of the power of sincerity. Known for his razor-sharp wit and willingness to tackle taboo subjects, he rarely found himself at a loss for words. Yet, in this instance, Keanu's quiet conviction had silenced him, not through confrontation, but through authenticity. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond the confines of the studio, sparking conversations about faith, tolerance, and the importance of respectful dialogue in an increasingly polarized world. By the time the credits rolled and the audience filed out of the theater, one thing was certain: Keanu Reeves had done more than just survive a tricky interview. He had transformed it into a moment of profound connection. And in doing so, he reminded everyone present that sometimes the most powerful statements aren't made with loud voices or clever comebacks, but with quiet confidence and unwavering truth. As the interview wrapped up and the cameras stopped rolling, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The lively chatter that usually filled the space during commercial breaks was replaced by an unusual quiet. Crew members exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly while others whispered to each other about what had just unfolded. Bill Maher, typically the center of attention after a taping, seemed unusually subdued as he gathered his notes and adjusted his tie. For once, his trademark smirk was absent, replaced by a thoughtful expression that hinted at introspection. Keanu, on the other hand, appeared completely unfazed. He stood up casually, thanked the production team with a warm smile, and shook hands with Maher before heading backstage. There was no sense of triumph or smugness in his demeanor, just the same calm humility that had defined his presence throughout the show. As he disappeared behind the curtain, the buzz among the crew grew louder. One stagehand muttered, "Man, did you see how he handled that? Classy. Just classy." Backstage, Keanu was greeted by a small group of producers and assistants who couldn't resist sharing their admiration. "That was incredible," one producer said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've seen Bill go after people for years, but I've never seen anyone handle him like that. You didn't fight back. You just answered. Honestly, it was kind. Beautiful." Keanu shrugged modestly, brushing off the praise. "It's not about handling anything," he replied softly. "It's about being honest. If someone asks me a question, I answer from the heart, that's all." His response only deepened the respect those around him already felt. It wasn't just his words during the interview that resonated, it was the authenticity behind them. In an era where public figures often craft carefully rehearsed responses to avoid controversy, Keanu's unfiltered sincerity stood out. He hadn't come prepared to debate religion or defend his beliefs. He simply spoke from a place of conviction, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, in the control room, the technical crew replayed clips of the exchange, dissecting every moment. The director leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Keanu's face intently. "You know," he said to his assistant, "most guests would have either laughed nervously or gotten defensive. But look at him, he's so calm, like he's having a normal conversation, not sitting across from one of the sharpest critics in Hollywood." The assistant nodded. "And can you believe Maher? He looked almost flustered. I mean, when does that ever happen?" Indeed, Maher's reaction, or lack thereof, at the end of the segment told its own story. After Keanu's final comment about respecting differing viewpoints, Maher had faltered. His usual arsenal of quips and jabs had failed him, leaving him momentarily speechless. When he finally managed to crack a joke about trading in his atheist card, it felt forced, as if he were scrambling to regain control of a situation that had slipped through his fingers. Even the audience could sense it. Their applause hadn't been for Maher's wit this time, it had been for Keanu's grace under pressure. Social media exploded within minutes of the episode airing. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire, with viewers chiming in from all corners of the globe. Some praised Keanu for his composure and wisdom, calling him a role model for respectful dialogue. Others admitted they weren't religious themselves but appreciated the way he articulated his beliefs without alienating those who disagreed. Memes began circulating, capturing Keanu's serene expression alongside captions like, "When your faith speaks louder than words," and "How to shut down a skeptic without saying a harsh word." Religious leaders also weighed in, many expressing gratitude for Keanu's defense of faith without hostility. A pastor based in Texas tweeted, "In a world quick to ridicule belief, Keanu reminded us tonight that faith is personal, profound, and deeply human. Well done." Meanwhile, secular commentators acknowledged the rarity of such a respectful exchange. One columnist wrote, "Whether you agree with him or not, you have to admire Keanu's ability to rise above mockery and respond with dignity. That's leadership." For Maher, the aftermath was more complex. While some fans defended his right to challenge belief systems, others criticized him for crossing a line. One viewer commented, "Mocking someone's faith isn't edgy, it's lazy." Keanu proved that real courage comes from listening, not tearing down. Another added, "Maher always says we need better conversations. Maybe he should start practicing what he preaches." Despite the mixed reactions, Maher himself remained characteristically defiant. During a podcast appearance days later, he briefly addressed the incident, though he avoided delving too deeply into specifics. "Look, I asked a question and he gave an answer," Maher said with a shrug. "Was it profound? Sure. Did it make me think? Maybe. But let's not act like I lost some grand battle. I'm still here, doing my thing." Yet, beneath the bravado, there was a subtle shift in Maher's tone, a hint of reflection that hadn't been there before. Whether consciously or not, he seemed to recognize that Keanu's response had exposed something vulnerable in him, the limits of cynicism. For all his sharp commentary and biting humor, Maher had encountered a perspective rooted in genuine conviction, and it had left him momentarily speechless. Days turned into weeks, and the ripple effects of the interview continued to unfold. Talk shows and news outlets revisited the clip, analyzing everything from Keanu's body language to the broader cultural implications of the exchange. Late-night hosts joked about the time Bill Maher got owned by Neo, referring to Keanu's iconic role in The Matrix. Comedians incorporated the moment into their routines, with one quipping, "Even Jesus probably wouldn't have known how to respond to that level of chill." But beyond the jokes and memes lay a deeper takeaway: the power of respectful disagreement. In a world increasingly divided by ideology, Keanu's approach offered a blueprint for navigating difficult conversations. Rather than meeting provocation with anger or defensiveness, he had responded with patience, empathy, and clarity. His example inspired countless discussions about finding common ground, even in the face of stark differences. For Keanu, life went on as usual. He returned to his work with the same quiet dedication that had earned him admiration long before the interview. Friends and colleagues noted that he never brought up the incident unless asked directly, and even then, he downplayed its significance. "It was just a conversation," he told a close friend over coffee. "Nothing more, nothing less." Still, the impact of that night lingered, not just for Keanu, but for everyone who witnessed it. Viewers found themselves reflecting on their own beliefs, questioning how they approached disagreements and considering the value of humility in discourse. The encounter served as a reminder that meaningful conversations don't require winning or losing. They require understanding. And perhaps that was the true legacy of the moment. Not the viral clips, not the debates it sparked, but the simple yet profound lesson it offered: that kindness, respect, and authenticity can transcend even the most polarizing divides. As the dust settled and the headlines faded, one truth remained clear: sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest messages. In the days following the interview, the conversation sparked by Keanu Reeves and Bill Maher continued to ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. The exchange wasn't just a fleeting moment of television drama. It had become a cultural touchstone, a reference point for discussions about faith, respect, and the art of disagreement. People from all walks of life weighed in, sharing their thoughts on social media, in blogs, and around dinner tables. For many, it was a reminder that even in an age of polarization, meaningful dialogue was still possible. Keanu himself remained, largely removed from the whirlwind of reactions. He didn't give interviews about the incident or post anything on social media addressing it. Instead, he carried on with his usual routine, working on film sets, riding motorcycles through winding roads, and spending quiet evenings at home. Those closest to him noticed nothing unusual, no change in his demeanor, no hint of pride or frustration over what had transpired. To Keanu, the moment seemed like any other interaction he'd had throughout his life: sincere, respectful, and grounded in authenticity. But while Keanu stayed out of the spotlight, others couldn't stop talking about him. Religious communities embraced his response as a testament to the power of faith expressed with humility. Sermons were preached using Keanu's words as examples of how to defend one's beliefs without alienating others. In churches across the country, pastors reminded their congregations that faith didn't have to be loud or confrontational. It could be quiet, personal, and deeply impactful. One minister said during a Sunday service, "Keanu showed us that you don't need to argue to share your truth. Sometimes, living your values is enough." On the flip side, skeptics and atheists found themselves reflecting on the encounter too. While some doubled down on their criticism of religion, others admitted they appreciated Keanu's approach. A popular atheist blogger wrote a piece titled, "Why I Respect Keanu Reeves's Faith," arguing that belief didn't have to be irrational or dogmatic. "What struck me most," the author wrote, "wasn't that Keanu believes in Jesus, it's that he believes in kindness, forgiveness, and hope. Those are universal principles worth celebrating, regardless of where you stand on theology." Even within Hollywood, the interview became a topic of discussion. Actors, directors, and producers who had worked with Keanu before weren't surprised by his poise under pressure. They knew him as someone who listened more than he spoke, who valued integrity over image, and who approached every situation with thoughtfulness. At a red carpet event weeks later, a reporter asked Charlize Theron, a longtime friend of Keanu's, what she thought about the viral moment. She smiled warmly and said, "That's just Keanu being Keanu. He doesn't do anything halfway, including standing up for what he believes in." Bill Maher, meanwhile, handled the aftermath in his own way. True to form, he refused to admit defeat or express regret publicly. During appearances on other talk shows, He joked about the incident, often framing it as a light-hearted clash of ideologies. "I went after Keanu thinking I'd get a laugh," he quipped on one late-night panel. "Instead, I got a sermon. Guess I should have seen it coming. He's basically a saint these days." Audiences chuckled, but there was an undertone of admiration in Maher's tone that hadn't been present before. Behind the scenes, however, those close to Maher noted a subtle shift in his perspective. Friends mentioned that he occasionally brought up the interview during casual conversations, though not always in the context of mocking it. Once, at a private gathering, he mused aloud, "You know, maybe there's something to this whole respectful disagreement thing. Not that I'm about to start quoting Bible verses, but I don't know, there's value in listening, right?" For viewers, the exchange between Maher and Keanu offered more than just entertainment. It provided a blueprint for navigating difficult conversations. Teachers began incorporating clips of the interview into classroom lessons on communication skills, encouraging students to analyze how Keanu diffused tension with calmness and clarity. Business leaders referenced the moment in seminars on conflict resolution, highlighting the importance of staying composed when faced with provocation. Even families used it as a starting point for discussing how to handle disagreements at home. One particularly moving story emerged from a small town in Ohio, where a high school student named Emily wrote an essay inspired by Keanu's response. Emily, who had grown up attending church but struggled with doubts about her faith, described feeling torn between embracing her beliefs and fitting in with peers who dismissed religion as outdated. Watching Keanu speak so openly about doubt and trust gave her permission to embrace both her questions and her convictions. "He made me realize that faith isn't about having all the answers," she wrote. "It's about trusting even when things don't make sense, and that's okay." The ripple effects extended beyond individual stories, shaping broader cultural narratives as well. Journalists explored themes of faith and skepticism in modern society, citing the interview as evidence that these topics didn't have to divide people. They could bring them together. Opinion pieces argued that Keanu's response exemplified the kind of empathy needed to bridge ideological gaps. As one columnist put it, "In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, Keanu reminded us that compassion can cut through even the thickest walls." Months later, when asked about the legacy of the interview during a rare press appearance, Keanu offered his typically understated take. "I think people want connection," he said simply. "They want to feel heard and understood. Whether it's about faith or family or favorite movies, we're all searching for common ground. That's what matters, not winning arguments but building bridges." His words resonated deeply, serving as a fitting conclusion to a moment that had captured the hearts and minds of millions. What started as a provocative question on a late-night talk show had evolved into something far greater, a reminder of the power of kindness, patience, and authenticity in fostering understanding. And while Keanu may have walked away from the experience unchanged, the rest of the world felt its impact in profound and lasting ways. As time passed, the memory of that night lingered, not as a controversy or a debate, but as a lesson in humanity. It proved that even in moments of tension, grace could prevail. It showed that true strength lies not in domination, but in vulnerability. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that sometimes the simplest truths, the ones spoken softly and sincerely, are the ones that resonate the loudest. Years after the now iconic interview between Bill Maher and Keanu Reeves, the moment continued to hold a special place in pop culture history. It wasn't just remembered as an entertaining clash of personalities or a clever exchange. It had become something more profound, a testament to the enduring power of authenticity and respect in communication. The ripple effects of that single conversation lingered far beyond the confines of late-night television, leaving an indelible mark on how people thought about faith, dialogue, and human connection. For Keanu, life carried on much as it always had. He remained the same unassuming figure he'd been before the interview, quietly going about his work, avoiding the trappings of celebrity, and focusing on what truly mattered to him. Fans admired this consistency. They knew that fame hadn't changed him, and neither would viral moments like this one. Yet there was no denying that the interview had elevated his reputation even further. To many, Keanu wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a symbol of grace under pressure, proof that staying true to oneself could inspire millions. In interviews and public appearances that followed, Keanu occasionally fielded questions about the incident, though he always responded with characteristic humility. "I don't think I did anything special," he once said during a Q&A session at a film festival. "I just answered honestly. That's all any of us can do." His words resonated deeply with audiences, reinforcing the idea that sincerity is its own kind of strength. People appreciated not only what he said, but how effortlessly he embodied those values in everyday life. Meanwhile, Bill Maher also moved forward, though the encounter appeared to leave a lasting impression on him. While he never publicly apologized for his line of questioning, subtle changes began to emerge in his approach to controversial topics. On future episodes of his show, he seemed more willing to listen, to let guests finish their thoughts without interruption, and to engage with viewpoints different from his own. Some longtime viewers noticed this shift and speculated that Keanu's calm demeanor might have planted a seed of reflection in Maher's mind. Whether intentional or not, the comedian's interactions became slightly less combative, allowing space for genuine conversation rather than mere debate. The legacy of the interview extended far beyond the two men involved. Educators, writers, and leaders across various fields cited it as a case study in effective communication. In classrooms, teachers used clips of the exchange to teach students about active listening, empathy, and the importance of responding thoughtfully instead of reactively. Business executives referenced Keanu's composure in leadership workshops, emphasizing that staying calm under pressure often yields better outcomes than reacting defensively. Even religious organizations incorporated the moment into sermons and seminars, encouraging congregants to emulate Keanu's respectful tone when discussing matters of faith. One particularly impactful initiative emerged from a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering interfaith dialogue. Inspired by Keanu's ability to bridge divides through kindness, the group launched a campaign called Finding Common Ground. The program brought together individuals from diverse backgrounds, atheists, believers, skeptics, and spiritual seekers, to engage in open, honest conversations about belief systems. Participants were encouraged to adopt Keanu's approach, speaking from the heart, listening without judgment, and prioritizing mutual understanding over persuasion. Within months, the campaign gained traction worldwide, sparking countless meaningful discussions and earning praise for its emphasis on compassion. Pop culture, too, kept the memory of the interview alive. Late-night hosts frequently referenced it in sketches and monologues, often portraying Keanu as the ultimate diplomat who could diffuse tension with a single sentence. Memes featuring Keanu's serene expression, alongside captions like, "When," "Your chill game is too strong," or "Proof that silence speaks volumes," remained popular online, cementing his status as a cultural icon. Documentaries exploring the intersection of faith and modern society included footage of the interview, highlighting it as a pivotal example of respectful disagreement in action. Perhaps most remarkably, the story inspired real-life transformations. Countless individuals shared personal anecdotes about how Keanu's response had impacted them. A struggling college student wrote an essay describing how the interview gave her the courage to embrace her faith openly, despite feeling pressured to hide it in academic settings. A father recounted using Keanu's words to reconcile with his atheist son, finding common ground in shared values like love and forgiveness. Even atheists reported feeling moved by Keanu's humility, saying it challenged stereotypes they'd held about religious believers. As time went on, the narrative surrounding the interview evolved from a focus on controversy to one of unity. It became clear that the moment wasn't just about religion versus skepticism. It was about humanity's capacity to connect despite differences. Writers penned op-eds celebrating the exchange as a rare example of productive discourse in an increasingly divided world. One article titled, "Lessons from Keanu," argued that the key to bridging ideological gaps lies not in winning arguments, but in creating spaces where opposing views can coexist peacefully. Another piece explored how Keanu's quiet confidence reminded us all to lead with kindness, even in moments of conflict. Decades later, when historians looked back on early 21st century media, the Maher Reeves interview stood out as a defining moment, a snapshot of a time when society grappled with questions of belief, identity, and belonging. Textbooks included it in chapters on communication and ethics, framing it as a model for navigating difficult conversations. Podcasts and documentaries revisited the event, interviewing experts and eyewitnesses to analyze why it resonated so deeply with audiences. Through these retellings, the story took on new layers of meaning, reflecting the evolving priorities of each generation. Ultimately, the legacy of the interview boiled down to one simple truth: authenticity transcends boundaries. Keanu's willingness to share his beliefs openly, without hostility or defensiveness, had sparked a global conversation about the value of respect and understanding. His actions served as a reminder that even in moments of disagreement, humanity has the potential to shine through. And so, the story of Bill Maher mocking Keanu Reeves for believing in Jesus, and Keanu's response silencing the room, became more than just a viral moment. It became a timeless lesson in the art of connection, a beacon of hope in a world often divided by ideology. It proved that while opinions may differ, kindness and sincerity are universal languages that everyone can understand. For Keanu, it was simply another day of living according to his principles. But for the rest of us, it was a gift, a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest messages.